Hi guys, hello, welcome to my channel. My voice is a little nasally because I am getting a little sick, so try to ignore that. We're a few days into February, so it is time to do our January reading wrap up, and I feel like I haven't done one of these in quite some time. Like I feel like it's been like a few months, and I want to be a lot more consistent with them this year. I don't know why, but wrap ups are like one of the most stressful videos for me. It's really hard for me to like articulate myself a lot of times. Like I know that I like a book, but it's hard for me to explain why. But I do feel like it's helpful to get my actual thoughts on books and things like that. Anyway, today we are going to be doing our reading wrap up for January, and I'm actually really excited because I read a lot more books than I thought I was going to. So I went into the month, I went into the year very positive and feeling really good, but the entirety of like the first week and a half, I read nothing. I started a couple of books, and one of them I am still working my way through, and then the other one I ended up having to DNF because I just was like, it just was taking me too long. So we soft DNF'd that, and then I got stuck into several different series, and I blew through books the rest of the month. And in total, I actually started 14 books, but we ended up reading, like finishing 12 of them. So for not reading or like finishing anything for the first like week and a half of the month, to end up with 12 books, I feel pretty proud of myself. And out of those 12 books that we did end up reading, 2.5 of them were via audiobook, which we'll talk about that half a little bit later. We in fact did not talk about that a little bit later. Basically that half book was the third book in the Infernal Devices series, and the only thing I really wanted to say was that like the narrator for that first book in that series was not my favorite. Like it was kind of hard to listen to. She made the voices sound a lot older than the characters were supposed to be, so it like really threw me off. However, the narrator for the third book was a different person, and they actually did a really good job. Like I actually preferred listening to the book than actually reading it myself. So I was kind of like switching back and forth between the audiobook and the physical book for the third book. I feel like I just said book 1,000 times. And then 2 of them were Kindle books. Hands down, I prefer just reading a physical book. But over the last couple of months specifically, I have really started enjoying doing other things like Kindle and audiobooks and things like that. Also, specifically with Kindle, I do have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, and I want to make sure that I'm actually like getting my money's worth. So for me personally, I want to at least read 2 books every single month from Kindle Unlimited. And that way also too, if I'm not hitting that, I can kind of like reevaluate whether it's worth it or not. But for now, we read 2. Good grief. And then what else? There was another stat that I wanted to tell you. Oh, and then also another one of my really big, pretty much my main goal for the entire year is to cut down on my physical TBR. I really want to focus on my TBR this year. I feel like last year I did a lot of purchasing, and I will definitely still be buying books this year. But I do want to try to read more than I'm purchasing, like a lot more than I'm purchasing. So that being said, out of the 12 that we read, 6 of them were from my physical TBR, 4 of them were from, you know, the audio and the Kindle books, and then 2 of them were new books that I purchased in January, and that was because they were part of a series. But that series is something that I had to read to get to another series that I do already own, that I've had for a long time, so it's kind of necessary. Anyway, those are just some fun little stats to kind of keep myself accountable. Now let's go ahead and get into the actual books that we read / didn't read, DNF'd in January. And the very first book that I picked up in January is Women Living Deliciously by Florence Given, and this one, as you can see, has a bookmark in it. This is the one that I'm still working my way through, which is kind of sad because I'm literally only on page 100, so clearly I have not put in that much effort into getting through this. This is essentially a self-help style book to help you start living deliciously, and the whole concept of that just sounds really appealing to me. And the author of this book is someone that I actually started following on Instagram years ago, and she does just have this aura of like confidence, and she just lives her life regardless of like what people think of her and that kind of thing, and that is definitely something that I strive to do. So far, I'm gonna be honest, it's very similar to like every other self-help book that I've tried to read. Obviously not in the sense of like the content, but just the style of writing, I guess. I don't know that self-help books are for me. I find them to be very repetitive and very kind of like, I don't want to say common sense because like I know people get a lot of stuff out of this, and there has been a couple of things in these first 100 pages that I have been like, oh, okay, and I've kind of like has made me think. I guess what I'm trying to say, I feel like I'm very in tune with my feelings. Like I know what I feel and why I feel those things. So a lot of times self-help books don't really help me because I already know. I know that I do certain things because of certain things. And so far with this book, that's kind of all it's gone over, but I'm still kind of holding out hope because this book is broken down into 3 different kind of sections. So there's excavating, blooming, which is what's stealing your joy. And so far, again, those have been kind of, you feel this because of this kind of a thing. And then the second section is planting, rediscovering you. And this section is kind of where it says that you like start to discover what you actually want. And that's kind of the thing I feel like I struggle with. Like, I know how I feel and I know why I feel those things, but I have a really hard time knowing how to move forward. And then blooming, the third section, is expanding into your delicious life. And I think that's where it kind of more focuses on like living deliciously. So after I get through this first section, I'm really hoping I can find more value out of this. And now I need to drink a sip of tea because my throat. Talking definitely is not helping this situation. The second book that we picked up in January is The Phoenix Keeper, and this edition is actually a special Illumicrate edition. And I actually got this from my book bestie for Christmas. And as you can see, this one does still have a bookmark in it as well. So that means this one is our DNF for the month, our soft DNF. I feel like I just wasn't in the mood for it because this is a very like cutesy, cozy kind of story. And I picked this up as like my first book of the year, which the beginning of the year, I'm ready for a fresh start. I'm ready to just like move and groove. Basically the opposite of like a cozy vibe. It's basically about a girl that works at a zoo that holds like mythical creatures. And she specifically is the Phoenix Keeper, along with just like the other magical birds. And anything to do with her job or like describing the animals and just like the things that they kind of like got up to, that was the best part of this book for me. There were some flamingos that I can't remember what they were called. Actually, I think there's a picture of them. Yeah, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that very well, but these are the little like disco ball mirrored flamingos. And then there was another little creature, this little blue guy down here. His breed of bird has like super glue style spit. So he had his own kind of like little storyline of like constantly like stealing shiny things from the keeper, the zoo guests, and things like that, and spit gluing them together into like a big mountain of all his treasures. So yeah, so all of that stuff was just super, super cute and I really enjoyed that. But I think the one thing that I did actually have a hard time with as far as the story goes is the actual main character herself. She just seemed very immature and juvenile, and it just, I don't know, it made it hard to kind of like get too invested in the story because I just didn't care about her as a person. So those are kind of my thoughts on that for now. Moving on to our next couple of books. This was the first series of the month that I really kind of got stuck into, which was The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. The first book, Clockwork Angel, I actually read at the end of last year. So this one doesn't count for January, but I did read the second and third book in the series, which the second one is Clockwork Prince, the third one is Clockwork Princess, which I don't have that one to show you because Kevin is currently reading it. This is actually the series I was talking about earlier where I bought the second and third book in it because I already own another series within this universe. So Cassandra Clare basically has, I think it's called like the Shadowhunters universe or something like that. Shadowhunters in this book are kind of like people that hunt demons, and that's who basically the main cast of the books are. In general, this first book in the series is about Tessa, who through a series of events, like she's trying to find her brother, and through a series of events, she ends up with a group of shadow hunters. And again, shadow hunters kind of like hunt demons and just kind of like keep the peace for the humans. Like there's this whole magical world that humans don't know about, and shadow hunters are kind of the ones that keep it that way. Like make it so that they're safe from the other bad magical beings and things like that, if that makes any sense. But what's cool about this universe specifically is it's kind of got like a steampunk kind of vibe to it, which in any other situation, I'm not gonna lie, is not my favorite aesthetically. And going into this, I wasn't sure that I was gonna like it, but I actually did really enjoy it. And just in general, like a lot of stuff happens in this series. I can't really explain exactly what goes on, and obviously I don't want to give away any spoilers, but we're just kind of like following Tess and her life kind of living with these shadow hunters and the adventures that they end up getting themselves into. There is also, like I mentioned, a little bit of a romance, specifically a love triangle, which are typically not my favorite. And I am gonna be honest, the love triangle aspect definitely did have its moments where it was just like ripping my heart out. But I feel like you definitely have to give it credit where credit is due. If a book can make you cry, like she's a good one, you know, the writing is good. Also, the only other thing that I really wanted to say about this series is that it has kind of like a weird vibe. Not a weird vibe. It is a fantasy series with like a lot of action and stuff like that, but it also feels kind of slow. Not slow in like the sense of like, ugh, this is taking me forever. It just seems kind of like, I don't know, casual. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's the time period or something. I'm not really sure because this does take place in the 1800s. But overall, very good series. What did I star rate this? Typically with series, I don't star rate the books individually because I am a binger. I just kind of like blow through all of them. And at that point, I typically don't remember like what happened in what book. So it's kind of hard for me to rate them individually. Kind of all together, I did rate this as a 4-star series. It wasn't like my most favorite, but it was really, really good. And I would definitely recommend. And with that, we're gonna move on to another series that I also got myself stuck into, which was the Ice Planet Barbarians series. And I basically binged the last like 4 books. Well, not like the last total, but the last 4 that I own. This is actually a series of 21 books, and I currently own the first 8. And that is basically because the first 8 of them have these new special edition covers and special edition like content, and the bonus content is actually like good hearty bonus content. Like here's the actual story itself, and we have like a full-on like good chunky story as like an extra. And in this past month I did pick up the 5th book with intentions of just kind of reading it, like having it as like a palate cleanser in between 2 other books. I was kind of feeling on the verge of a slump, so I needed something like quick and fun and spicy, because for whatever reason when I feel slumpy or I'm in a slump, spice is the cure for me. And boy did I get back in the mode, because I read this one and then quickly after binged the next 3, and I would have continued had I had more books. And as far as like what this series is actually about, it's basically alien smut. It's about a group of human women who were abducted by some aliens that were not very nice, but that ship ended up crash landing on a different alien planet, aka the Ice Planet, where the barbarians live. And it's called the Ice Planet because it is snowy all year round. My nightmare. And then the barbarians are called barbarians because they do live very primitively. Like they live in caves, they hunt with like spears and things like that. And each book in the series focuses on a different human and alien pairing. The first one in the series is still my all-time favorite out of the grouping, but this one, Barbarian's Mate, which is the 6th one, I think, there's nothing that I love more than a grumpy character that like slowly melts for the other person. It just is the sweetest freaking thing when their like mushy gushy side starts coming out. And this one definitely had that, but this one was extra fun for me because the alien was the grumpy one and he just didn't realize how he was coming across. His character is just very like, he's not even grumpy, he's just like very matter of fact, and I don't know why, but it just made it like that much cuter. So he's definitely my favorite alien out of the entire series so far. And we've definitely had like a mixed bag of reviews. Most of them have been 4, we've had a couple of 5, and I think we've had like 1 3-star rating. And then as far as our spice rating, I did give this series a 4 because we are dealing with aliens. It is a little bit more taboo, and because it is kind of more erotica versus just a spicy story, there is definitely a lot of spice scenes throughout the books. That is everything that I have for Ice Planet Barbarians. Now let's move on to our 2 audiobooks that we listened to this month, which were both thrillers. I really love a thriller for audio. And the first one that I listened to was That's Not My Name by Megan Lally, I think is how you say her name. It's basically about a girl who wakes up in the middle of the woods and she's kind of like roughed up and she has absolutely no idea who she is. And that would honestly be the most terrifying thing ever, especially if you woke up like beaten up. Like what the heck happened? You know what I mean? She has no idea what happened, doesn't know her name, nothing. And aside from that, like generally the premise of the story had a really interesting kind of plot because we basically have 2 storylines going on where our Jane Doe can kind of like fit into either of them. So the whole concept, like while you're reading, is you're trying to figure out who she actually is, like what storyline she actually fits into, and it is just so good. There was one storyline where we have a father who is missing his daughter, and then we have another one where a boyfriend's girlfriend went missing and everyone thinks he murdered her. And the book overall just had like a really eerie kind of tone, which obviously is good for a thriller, and I do honestly think that the narrator helped with that a lot. And also as far as like the ending goes, there were certain elements of it that I definitely did guess, but there were other elements that I absolutely did not. There was even a point in the book where I got like a little choked up. Like it was a good book. It was a really good book, which I'm glad for because I checked this one out on my Libby app and it took me like months for it to finally be available. I waited a very long time to listen to this book, so I'm really glad it was like worth the wait. Next up, our other thriller that we listened to in January was The Locked Door by Frida McFadden, and I am trying to like Frida McFadden so bad, but I just think she's very average. Please don't hate me. To be fair, this is only the 2nd book that I've read of hers. I read this one obviously and The Housemaid, and yeah, they both just seemed like they were good, but they both just seemed very average and very predictable. So I don't get it. This book in particular is about Nora, who's a surgeon and also the daughter of a serial killer. When Nora was 11, her dad got arrested for murdering women in his basement. And now that Nora is an adult, she is again a surgeon, and some of her patients who looked like her dad's like type are getting murdered in very similar ways. So throughout the book, you're kind of like following Nora as she's like trying to figure out who's murdering these women. And again, I enjoyed it. Like I was invested in the story, much like I was with The Housemaid, but I guessed who it was almost immediately. As soon as like the character came into the story, I'm like, oh, I bet it's that person. And there was no surprise. I'm not opposed by any means to reading any more Freida McFadden in the future. I just don't think I'm gonna like go out of my way to pick one up. The next two books that I have are both ones that I read on my Kindle, and they are part of a series. So we have House of Lies and Sorrow, and then the second book, which is Prince of Sins and Shadows. And I don't actually know how long this series is, and I'm not sure, honestly, if I'm gonna ever find out. I enjoyed the first book quite a bit. I gave it 4 stars. The second one, I still gave 3 stars to, but I kind of lost interest in the general plot. The first book is basically about a girl who is married off to a fae prince, as a lot of fantasy romances start, but he has had 2 or 3 other wives before her that were killed almost immediately after marrying him. And so she's kind of like going into this marriage thinking she's walking the plank, essentially. Like her life is about to end. Basically, the first book is her and her new fae husband trying to figure out who's killing his wives and like why and things like that. And we do figure out, I'm pretty sure, in that first book. Like I said, kind of with the Infernal Devices, when it's a series, specifically like fantasy, where it's like one big story with a lot of things going on, I don't remember like what happens in what book. So I don't want to say too much because I don't want to like go into the second book not realizing it. But just in general, I feel like the story started feeling very repetitive in that second book. It's just kind of like the female lead being in constant danger and her not being like other female characters from other fantasy romance novels. She is very much like a representation, I feel like, of what an actual human being, like if I got plucked out of this world and sent into the fae world and then my life was in danger, I would be like the girl from these books. Useless. One of my favorite things about the leads in fantasy novels and fantasy romances is just their kick-ass kind of nature. I love that they like step up to the plate and, you know, train, and they become these like warriors. And within the story, we are still very early on, so there is a possibility of her becoming that. But as of right now, 2 books in, she's still very much not doing that. And then the other thing that I'm kind of having an issue with is the actual romance itself. I don't really feel it. Like there's no tension, there's no courting, there's nothing. It's just like he's saying all the right things, but there's just no feeling. There's no action to like back that up. I mean, aside from him not letting her die. So that's another thing that's kind of like meh, making me kind of like not want to continue it. But again, the overall story is entertaining, and also another benefit to these books is they are really short. Again, I've been reading them on my Kindle, and I think each one took me like 5 hours. Like that's what's making me feel like I probably will continue the series. So that's kind of what I'm feeling with that. Moving on. Last but certainly not least, we have finally started the Plated Prisoner series. I have had the first 5 books of this series sitting on my shelves the entire time I've had this channel, which actually February 1st was my 2-year anniversary. So we are 2 years old, which is absolutely crazy. Gild, I literally read within 24 hours. I picked it up and did not put it down until I finished it. This one, however, did take me like 3 days to finish, but nearly 500 pages of this has taken me a day. So this one I'm going to be reading quicker than I read even this one, and it's a lot chunkier. This is kind of like a King Midas retelling, or like an inspired by King Midas, which if you don't know who that is, it's the guy that like everything he touches turns to gold. And in the first book, you're introduced to Orin, who is his favored saddle, and his saddle are essentially his harem of women. The fact that they're called saddles, I hate it. There's literally like a sentence in here somewhere that says like, you're a saddle to be ridden or something like that. Ew. Anyway, Orin is his favored, so he has gilded her. So she is completely gold. Her skin and her hair and everything is gold. And not only is she a saddle, but because she's his favored saddle, she is also kept in a giant gilded cage. But essentially, the book kind of starts off kind of explaining who Orin is, who King Midas is, who the saddles are. And then you go through kind of like her day-to-day life a little bit, just kind of like being in this gilded cage 24/7, not being allowed to like talk or interact really with anyone else. And then I think like halfway through this book, everything just gets completely flipped upside down, which originally I wasn't sure that I was gonna like, but I absolutely ended up loving the progression of the story. It was, however, a moment when everything got like flipped upside down that I ended up bawling my eyes out. It still makes me sad to think about. But like I said earlier, if a book can make me cry, good emotional writing. Like that's the kind of stuff, I hate crying, but like I love a book that can get those kind of emotions out of me. And it just makes you like feel even more for the story, for the characters. It's just so good. This is so good. As of right now, because I am still reading the series, I can't really give it a solid star rating, but it's definitely feeling very 5-star territory. The deeper you get into the series, the better and better it gets. And as far as like the spice rating, as of right now, I'm giving it a 1, which is kind of funny because the entire reason I found out about these books is because I was watching a bunch of book recommendations specifically for spicy fantasy romances. And as of right now, there's only been 1 spice scene in each book. And the one that was in this one was barely a thing. So this one personally doesn't really count. And the one that happened in this one was more of like an essay kind of situation, which was not a good time, you know? We did actually finally get like a good romancy spice scene in this third book, but it also like just happened and I'm, again, almost 500 pages in. That being said, I don't mind at all that there isn't that much spice. I just thought it was kind of funny that the only reason I have this series is because I was looking for books with spice and there just really isn't that much in it so far. And with that, those are all of the books that I read and started in January. Let me know in the comments down below what one of your favorite books that you read for February was. Not February, January. It's February now and I just filmed my like February TBR and stuff recently, so I'm all over the place with the months.